This
Brothers and
conference will
sisters,
now be recorded.
we're going to look at Naaman, as you can probably guess, but we're going to look at one of those final miracles in chapter 4. But just maybe as an introduction to our conversation tonight, hopefully one of the things that I'm getting across, or one of the main points I'm trying to get across, is this idea of Elisha and his work, but how that also applies to us and how we can apply that in our own lives. And Elisha's work is very much about the development and encouragement and building up of the ecclesia. And we find that Elisha spends most of his time around people, which is the opposite of Elijah, who spent most of his time by himself. But I think it's important for us, brothers and sisters, to also understand that we live in the age of Elisha. We live in the Elisha phase of world history. The Elijah phase of world history ended with the French Revolution in the 1700s, late 1700s, early 1800s. In the following 200 or so years that have followed have been the Elisha phase. And how do we know that? Well, the Elisha phase is all about the development and creation and building up of the ecclesia. And once the Ahab Jezebel system had a lot of its power broken due to the French Revolution and the wars that followed afterwards, the ecclesia of the living God flourished throughout the world. And we also saw the national resurrection, the partial fulfillment of the national resurrection of the nation of Israel coming back into the land. And the next phase is going to be the Jehu phase. And the Jehu phase is Christ's return and bringing the nations to heel, the killing of the 70 sons of Ahab, the 70 nations, the destruction of those who had a covenant with sin, the 42 relatives of Ahab and Jezebel. And that's the next phase. And I believe that we're very much in the early stages or the late stages of the Elisha phase, in the early stages or the setting up of the Jehu phase. And that's pretty obvious just by looking at the events around the world today in terms of both political and ideological and financial issues that are very much on the horizon. And so it's useful for us to understand that being in the Elisha phase, we should be very much about doing the things that Elisha was doing, which was, again, building up, encouraging and strengthening the ecclesia. Now, you'll recall, hopefully, from last week, let's get my mouse in the right place, this slide, try and organise a few little things here. Good, excellent, okay. And we were talking last week about the miracle of the widow, the miracle of the Shunammite woman, the miracle of the cured stew, and we want to finish this little section here, the miracle of the first fruits, because each one of these has bearing on the development of the ecclesia. So you recall the miracle of the widow was about redemption, salvation from the slave, from the bondman. Her sons were going to be bondmen. The miracle of the Shunammite, which was about creating hope for the future, creating a legacy, a child that the inheritance could be passed on to. The miracle of the stew, which was the curing of the poison in the pot. And that was a miracle about healing. And so the next miracle in chapter 4 is this miracle of first fruits. And it's only a short little section here. It says there in verse 42 that a man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing the man of God some bread as a first fruits offering. And he had 20 loaves of barley and ripe ears of corn in his sack. And so Elisha said, give them to the people so that they can eat. Now, Baal Shalisha means Lord of the Third. Baal meaning Lord and Shalisha meaning the third. And by etymology, it implies Lord of the small company, 3 being the smallest company you can have. Or another way of saying that would be Lord of small things, right? It's only a few, it's only a little bit. And that's what the first fruits were, weren't they? They were just a little bit. And they were a little bit or a taste of what was to come. They were a taste of the blessings that were shortly about to come upon the farmer or upon the nation. And this particular area is located in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Bethel, and it's where Saul was looking for his father's asses. You might recall that from 1 Samuel 9, verse 4. He was wandering all over those hills trying to find his father's asses, and not very successfully. And so this is where the first fruits have come from. And he brings the first fruits to Elisha. That's interesting, isn't it? Because we're told in respect of poison in the pot, that there was a famine in the land. And so here we have a scenario where somebody has got first fruits. Somebody has had a successful harvest, And rather than taking them to Jerusalem to present them to the priest at Jerusalem, the man brings them to the prophet Elisha, the man of God. And so we have this famine, we have this issue with poison in the pot, and they manage to resolve that issue. And now comes sustenance from quarters unknown, from some unusual place. And sometimes it happens, doesn't it, brothers and sisters, when we're facing trials and difficulties, when we're facing a famine, there isn't enough. Sometimes out of the blue, a brother or a sister will come and bring a meal or send some money or come and support us in our trials and in our difficulties. And sometimes it's from the most unusual of places. It certainly happened in my life. The people that you would think least able to help because of their own personal situation are often the people that help, which is actually a criticism of those who could help but didn't. And maybe that's something we should think about, brothers and sisters, as we consider our brothers and sisters when they've got trials and tribulations. Now, those of us who have resources, those of us who have time, those of us who can put our shoulder to the wheel should, because that's what Elisha does. He works for the welfare of the ecclesia. Now, prophets in Israel had a very special place. The king was responsible for managing the civil code, the civil law, which was built off the back of the religious law, and the priest was responsible for keeping the religious law. But the priest couldn't make changes to the law. His job was to keep it, just as the king's job was to keep the civil law. Only a prophet could change religious law. Only a prophet could reinterpret or interpret or refine the law, which is why the teachers in Christ's day were so concerned about whether Jesus was the prophet, like under Moses. Now, so what does a man bring? Well, the man brings 20 loaves of barley and ripe ears of corn in his sack. And so he's bringing grain and food, and he's bringing corn. Now, barley is the first grain harvest, and the barley loaves are considered to be poor man's food, not being as well refined as wheat. And to give you an example, Gideon is described as a loaf of barley, a barley loaf falling down a hill. That's Judges 7, verse 13. And it's the very first of the grains to become ripe. And it's used as a wave offering, which was conducted the day after Passover. That's Leviticus 23, verse 10 to 11. And it marks the start of the Feast of Weeks, which is a period of rejoicing, time of rejoicing. But what you may not know is that Passover could not be held unless the first of the barley harvest had eared out. In other words, when the priest went out a month before Passover, if he couldn't find the first of the ripe barley harvest, he would extend Passover a month, then I'd add a 13th month. And so it's very important, this idea of the first fruits is critically important. It's connected very tightly with the Passover. So what is the first fruits? Well, the first fruits represent a couple of things. One, they're a recognition of God's blessing. We read about that in Deuteronomy 26, verse 2. And it also marks the salvation of the nation from Egypt, and that's Deuteronomy 26, verse 3 to 11. And so it talks about salvation, but it really talks about resurrection. It really talks about the first blessings. It represents the whole of the harvest to come. And so God would say to the nation, look, your grain is your first of your grain is now ripe. You need to bring me a tithe. You need to bring me the first fruits of your crop, which is kind of bizarre when you think about it, because you've got all this barley almost ready to be harvested, and then God says, now's the Feast of Weeks, you need to leave and come and have a festival. That's a big ask, isn't it, brothers and sisters? If you had thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of investment in this harvest, and it's just coming ripe, and somebody said, hey, by the way, we actually need you down in Wellington for a while for a feast and a celebration, what would you do? Your natural reaction would be, haha, love to come, but I actually need to stay and make sure nothing goes wrong with the crop. I need to protect my crop from raiders. I need to protect my crop from birds and insects. I need to protect my crop and make sure it's getting enough water and irrigate it if I need to. But God says, no. You've got to put your faith in me, and you've got to leave, and I will look after your crop, and you've got to bring me the first fruits, which is recognition of what I've done for you. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 20, resurrection and first fruits are tied together. Come across to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 20. We read, now Christ is risen from the dead and has become the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. And so the first fruits represent resurrection, whereas the Passover represents redemption. And so we go from redemption to resurrection. The lamb must die so that the angel of death passes over you, so tomorrow you can leave at first light. Your resurrection is in the morning. Now that's interesting because Christ's resurrection was in the early morning, wasn't it? We're told that in John. And so Christ is the first fruits of those who have died. And so what is it saying? Well, it's saying, well, he is the representation of the entire ecclesia who is guaranteed resurrection. We can have confidence in resurrection because Christ was resurrected. And so what is this chap told to do? Well, he's told, isn't he? It says, he says to the attendant, and says to go and hand it out. He says, distribute it to the people so they can eat, because this is what the Lord says, they will eat and have a surplus. And he's incredulous, like, what are you talking about? How are we going to serve 100 men? Ooh, that's an interesting number, isn't it? 100. What does 100 represent? Well, whenever you've got something squared, 6 times 6, or 10 times 10, or 5 times 5, right? It's compounded. It's a compounded value. So 10 represents everything, completeness, total. It's comprehensive. So, for example, Laban changed Jacob's wages 10 times. There are 10 virgins. There are 10 commandments. The dragon has 10 horns. It's all of them. And so this 10 times 10 represents the summation of the ecclesia, the totality of the ecclesia. Now, in reality, there might have been 101 or there might have been 99. But for the purposes of this passage, it's 10 times 10. And the work of Elisha is to use the blessings of God to feed the ecclesia. And we're told something peculiar. We're told that there will be some left over. So it'll feed all of the ecclesia, and there'll be some left over for the next generation. There'll be some left over for the next meal. There'll be some left over for the future. And that's the promise, isn't it, brothers and sisters? Christ says, give, and it will be given to you. A large quantity, pressed down together, shaken down, and running over will be put into your lap, because you will be evaluated by the same standard by which you evaluate others. That's Luke 6, verse 38. Give. Give a little bit and watch it expand. Give a little bit and watch it multiply. Give a little bit. Here's the deal, brothers and sisters. If no one gives anything, nothing can be multiplied. If no one's prepared to make a sacrifice, then there can't be a blessing. And so there's a number of correlations between this little event, which is a couple of passages, which tie us to the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000. Because what happens, brothers and sisters? Well, it's more than 100, clearly. It's a different number. But it represents the entirety of the people that were there. And the disciples distribute the bread and the fish. And there's a little bit left over, isn't there? There's 12 baskets. Or there's 7 baskets. Enough for the next generation. Enough to pass on as a legacy. And so, brothers and sisters, if we want to be Elishas, then we need to be the type of people who are prepared to give, who are prepared to bless, who are prepared to contribute, so that the little bit that we give can be multiplied to the benefit of the entire household. And so this man who brings his first fruits, trusting in God that God will look after his crops, is beneficial to the entire ecclesia. So now let's come to Naaman. So we're told in chapter 5, we've got this rather interesting and in some respects quite peculiar story, because there's some oddities about the story. And when you read it through, you go, oh yeah, Naaman, he had this woman, this girl he made, and she told him about this prophet, and he goes down there and yada, yada, yada. At face value, you go, okay, the story's pretty simple. But there's a significant amount underneath. So we're told that Naaman was the commander of the army of the king of Aram, or Syria, and he was a great man in the opinion of his master, and he was highly favored because by him Yahweh had given victory to Aram, or Syria. Though he was a mighty and a valiant man, he suffered from leprosy. So let's just unpack that. First of all, Naaman is the commander of the army of the king. So he is the head of the joint chiefs of staff for the king of Syria, the king of Aram. He's the king's right-hand man in military affairs. He's the king's personal bodyguard. We know about that later on, because he says to Elisha, when I go into the temple with the king and he bows himself down, don't count it to me as a sin. Well, why would he go into the temple? We'll go into the temple because he's the king's bodyguard. He's there to make sure that nothing happens to the king, even in the temple, in the most intimate spiritual time of the king, and it is most vulnerable. Who goes with him? It's Naaman. And we're told here that he's a great man. That word, brothers and sisters, great, is the same word that's used of the Shunammite woman in chapter 4, verse 8. It means to be highly esteemed. And he was highly esteemed. He was exalted above his peers. Now, why was he exalted above his peers? Well, he was exalted above his peers because Yahweh gave him victories. Oh, okay. Who did God give him victories over? Well, he gave him victories over the people of Israel. So we're told about that in the next verse. That's a peculiar thing, isn't it? That God would bless a foreign military commander who raids and slaughters and kills the people of Israel, God's people, so-called. You know, we often think that God only blesses his own people. He blesses us as Christadelphians, and he blesses the Jews because they're connected to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We don't think of God blessing other Gentiles or other people or other politicians or other military leaders or other business leaders. We just think God blesses his people because, well, we're God's people, and God does bless us. But here's somebody who is a butcher. He runs a killing factory. He runs the military of Syria, who are at war with the king of Israel. Now here's a question. What kind of person would God want to be the leader of the joint chiefs of staff in Syria? What kind of person would God bless in that position? It's a bit strange, isn't it? And is God blessing leaders in our time? Is God blessing certain politicians and certain business people and certain military people who are completely unrelated to us? Is God blessing Putin? Is God blessing Biden? Is God blessing Hipkins? You see, brothers and sisters, God blesses who he chooses to bless because they are useful to him. And it really has nothing to do with what our attitude or thought might be in regard to those people. Because we don't know. God doesn't send us a note saying, by the way, here is the list of people I've decided to bless this week. Please pray for them. Gavin? Gavin's terrible. Why would you bless Gavin? It's not our call. It's God's call. And we could name historical world leaders who have excelled against the odds, couldn't we? Reagan, Thatcher, Bush, Obama, American presidents. Global leaders on the world stage. But it's what God wants, isn't it, brothers and sisters? And we need to be careful that we don't get on the wrong side, because we might have certain views of certain politicians. We might think this politician will do great things, or this politician might do great things or be helpful. But what if the politician we think is going to do a great job is actually not the politician Yahweh's blessed? What if God's blessed the politician or the leader or the person that we don't like? What if God blessed Donald Trump? Oh, there's a burner. Most people don't like Donald Trump. What if God blessed him? Or what if God's blessed Sunak or Macron or whoever? See, brothers and sisters, this is why we don't vote. We don't get involved in the world's politics, because they've got nothing. We're not of this world. It's got nothing to do with us. And we don't want to be caught in a situation where we're seeking a blessing on somebody God's cursing, or maybe not blessing. So Naaman was the commander of the army of the king of Syria. And we're told here that he was a valiant man and he was mighty. Now, what was his purpose? Well, his purpose was to go and attack other countries, but particularly he goes and attacks Israel. He's a thorn in the side of the king of Israel. He's a distraction. He's anti the Jezebel and Ahab system. And that's useful for the ecclesia, because what it means is that his activities are a distraction for Jezebel and Ahab to preoccupy them so that they're not going about destroying the ecclesia. So in that respect, he's quite useful. He's useful for the ecclesia in the sense that he keeps other people off the ecclesia's back. And so, brothers and sisters, it can be hard sometimes when we're reading the newspaper and we're getting all this information to not take a step back and look at things from God's perspective and say, I don't know why God's got this person in this position or why these series of events are happening, but it's God's purpose and he's going to drive out his outcome. And we know what his outcome is. We know, broad brush, 10,000 foot view of what God's plan is. And so we have to adopt God's perspective. That's the point of the parable of the chariots of fire, isn't it? The servant didn't see the chariots of fire. He didn't perceive the way Elisha perceived. All he saw was the drama around the city unfolding in front of him. And brothers and sisters, we have to see the chariots of fire. We have to look with God's eyes, not our own eyes. We have to adopt God's perspective. The idea of valiant there means resourceful. It means somebody who has the ability to apply available resources to overcome or to address a specific situation. That's the kind of person that you want to run an army. Somebody who's very, very good with the administration and with the coordination and with the materials available. Napoleon said an army marches on its stomach. So if you don't have somebody who's very good at coordinating and managing resources, then you've got a problem. And he was mighty. Has the idea of being somebody who is proactive, who doesn't wait, who takes initiative, who's strong and capable and knowledgeable. But there's a problem, isn't there? He's suffering from leprosy, living death. It's called the botch of Egypt, the disease of Egypt. That's interesting, isn't it, brothers and sisters? If you live in the world, you'll get the diseases of the world. If you want the things that belong to the world, you'll get everything that goes along with the world. Oh, we'll see that a bit later on, won't we, with Gehazi. And so what happens? Well, on one of the raids to the territory of Israel, so here he is, he's off there with his band of murderous men. They take captive of a young girl when she was an infant, who had eventually become an attendant to Naaman's wife. And she mentioned to her mistress, if only my master were to visit the prophet who was in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Well, there's a couple of interesting things there, brothers and sisters. First of all, this whole thing starts in a household. Like just about all the other miracles we saw. The Shunammite's household, the widow's household, the household of the sons of the prophets. And now we've got a Syrian household. And we're told here that they go and they raid a village or a town in Israel and they take captive a young girl when she was an infant. That's interesting, brothers and sisters, for one reason. Why would you take an infant? You see, if you're a raider, your objective is to take slaves. The objective of taking slaves is that they're economically, or you can put them to work. So you'd go and when you raided, you would take the healthy and strong young men through to maybe 45 or 50, because they're capable and strong. Anybody with a trade, even better. And you take the young women to be maids or perhaps wives in your society. But you would discard the elderly and you would discard the very young. So a very young child would be useless to you for many years. And a very old man would be useless to you because he's too old to do anything. He's aged. And often those two groups would be slaughtered. Often those two groups would be killed. So there weren't any witnesses to say, oh, which way did they go when they left? Or who did this? But Naaman picks up this little infant. Why would he pick up the infant? Why do you think he would pick it up? Pick up a little baby girl, maybe a year old, crying for a mum, who's being bound and gagged and thrown on a cart to Syria, whose father's being shackled in chains and whipped and beaten as he's forced on the road to Syria. And she's brought up in Naaman's household. It says that she goes from being very young to becoming an attendant to Naaman's wife. That's an important role. That's a role of trust. You wouldn't put somebody who wished you ill into that position, into that role. And so here she is. She's grown up into this beautiful girl. Why do you think so? Well, I think that Naaman's childless. I think Naaman's wife is childless. And he stumbles across this beautiful wee girl who's bawling her eyes out in her cot, and he melts. And he picks this little girl up, and she wraps her hand in his beard, and from that moment on, Naaman's hooked. Just like the great woman in Shunem. That's interesting, isn't it? Two great people who had the same problem. And maybe that's why God blesses Naaman, because Naaman's the kind of guy that has compassion on those who can't survive without help. His help. He can be appealed to. He's gentle. He can be easily entreated. And we know that from later on. We'll get to that little point in a bit. Now she seems to know her nationality because she's paying attention to the stories and the rumors of her people. You probably find there's numerous slaves who are working in Naaman's household from Israel and other areas. And so they probably all talked. And so she picks up the story about this Elisha chap who apparently is in Samaria from time to time. So she's very attentive to what's going on in the household. Maybe she's overhearing the conversations of the soldiers who are talking about the goings on in the nation of Israel. We don't really know. But what we do know is that she cares enough about Naaman to say something. She cares enough to say something to her mistress. If only my master were to visit the prophet who is in Samaria. Because that man could save him. And so this little girl, this maid, probably 15, 16, is thinking about her de facto dad, her adoptive father, and thinking, if only. Now Naaman went to inform his master the king and told him something like this. Thus and so spoke the young woman from the territory of Israel. And the king said, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. And so he took with him 10 talents of silver and 60 units of gold, along with 10 sets of clothing. So the king values Naaman sufficiently to write a letter to the king of Israel, who's his enemy, and says, I'm sending the head of my military establishment, and I want you to cure him. that doesn't go over very well, as you can imagine. And he takes with him an enormous amount of money. 35 talents of silver is about 30,000 US dollars, so it's probably around about 45 in New Zealand dollars, and 6,000 pieces of gold. So assuming that it's an ounce of gold per piece, it may not be, but that's 11.5 million US dollars, so around about 16 million New Zealand dollars. And he takes 10 Armani suits with silk shirts and silk ties and braided leather belts and nice shiny black shoes. Full sets, full suits. And so he's going with a huge amount of money, some of which will be for expenses, but presumably some of which would be as a present for the king of Israel or for the holy men. Well, the king doesn't take this very well, king of Israel. He says he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which reads as follows. And now, as this letter finds its way to you, look, I sent my servant Naaman to you so you may be able to heal him of his leprosy. Now, the king of Israel read the letter and completely loses it. He tears his clothes. Now, the idea of tearing your clothes, depending on who you are, but the idea of tearing your clothes is an emotional reaction of dismay. It indicates ruin. We're ruined. And he cries out, am I God that I can kill and give life? Is this man sending me a request to heal a man's leprosy? Let's think about this. He must be looking for a reason to start a fight with me, which is a crazy way to start a fight with somebody, if you think about it. Like, if you're going to start a fight with somebody, you wouldn't send them your best general. Hey, by the way, here's our best general with an elite force. Would you mind particularly healing him? How about we just kill him and them, and then we just get to the fighting? Doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it? And it's likely that the king of Israel knew exactly who Naaman was, because Naaman had been raiding his territory. And so his immediate conclusion is he's going to start a war. It's a bit odd that he would conclude that the king of Syria would send his best military commander to start a war. Now, Elisha hears about it, doesn't he? And when Elisha heard, the man of God heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king and said, why did you tear your clothes? You see, the tearing of clothes is a very important thing. It's unusual that somebody would do that. It's absolute emotional distress. Please let the man come and visit me, and he will learn that there is a prophet in Israel. You know, it won't just be Naaman that learns that there's a prophet in Israel. There'll be plenty of people who will learn that there's a prophet in Israel. And it appears that Elisha is very well plugged in to the court in Israel. He's got informants and people telling him what's going on, because this is not months and months of time. It's not like Elisha was waiting for the next post to arrive and hand him the latest news, which was 3 or 4 weeks old. And so Elisha is very much paying attention to what's going on in his nation. And so he writes a response back to the king and says, send the man down so he might learn there's a prophet in Israel. You know, it's quite similar in some respects to the 2nd of Kings chapter 1 verse 3, where the angel of the Lord spoke to Elijah and said, get up and go and meet the messengers from the king of Samaria, that he might know that there is a God in Israel. Similar concepts, similar ideas, that people should know that there is a God in Israel. They should know that there is a prophet in Israel. And so the king of Israel sends a letter back to the king of Assyria, to Syria, presumably. And so Naaman came down with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. So there's quite a parade. There's a number of people here. He's got chariots, and he's got footmen, and he's got horses, and he's got carts, and he's got treasure. Like, he's making his way through all these towns, and it's a small army coming. Like, it's quite an entourage. And so all his splendor and his polished armor and all his men marching in line with the drums and the pipes or whatever it is they did back then, and the carts and the horses, and everybody loves a parade. And so here's this parade, and it turns up to Elisha's house. And this is great. Elisha sends a servant. He says, I don't ever want to talk to the guy. Like, just, Gehazi, can you just get somebody to go and tell him to go wash? 7 times should do it. Like, just send someone to go tell him, go wash. Well, you can just imagine. Naaman doesn't go to the palace in Samaria. He doesn't go and see the king of Israel. Well, we're not told he goes to see the king of Israel. We're told he goes to Elisha. Well, as you can imagine, Naaman absolutely does his nut. Naaman flew into a rage and left, telling himself, look, I thought, he's surely going to come out to me and stand still and call out in the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the infection and cure the leprosy. You see, he's got great expectations. He's played this through his mind every mile that he's been tramping and trailing down to this location. He's thought this through. Oh, what's it going to be like when I meet him? What is he going to be wearing? What is he going to do? Oh, I think he might do this. And then no doubt all the people around him are saying, oh, well, maybe he'll do that. And somebody's like, oh, well, maybe he'll ask you to do this. Oh, maybe he'll ask you to go and do something amazing. Oh, what? Do I have to kill a lion? What about a bear? I don't know. Maybe he's going to have this grand ceremony with all the town folk there standing around up on trestles, and there'll be a dais, and I will walk up in all my glorious armor and outfit, and he's going to go whammo, and I'm going to be healed in front of everybody. No. Now go have a bath. And not only that, it's one of the servants that comes out and says, go have a bath. It's almost like he's saying, doesn't this guy know how important I am? I'm the captain of the Syrian army. I'm the chief captain of the Syrian army. I went to military university. I've got an MBA in military strategy. I killed Bozo the Great, and I just killed 3 lions. And I eat bears for breakfast. I've got a gold medal for the champion 100 distance running. I've wrestled a horse and a bull twice. The problem was, brothers and sisters, expectations about what would happen didn't happen, did they? There was no show of amazing power. He was just told to go and bathe in a muddy river. And he says, aren't the Abana and Pharpar rivers in Damascus much better than the water in Israel? Couldn't I just have bathed in one of them? Could he just sent me a note and said, hey, by the way, you're dirty, go have a wash. Any river will do. No. You've got to wash in the Jordan River. You've got to wash in the descender. You've got to wash in the river that goes from Adam to death. That's the river you've got to wash in. Because you have to acknowledge that you're in that river. You're one of the sons of Adam floating down that river like a log, which ends up in lifeless destruction. And so Naaman was being taught a lesson, wasn't he? Being taught that it doesn't matter how great you are, how powerful you are, and how well respected you are, and what amazing feats you've done, or what amazing education you have, you're the same as everybody else. You've got leprosy and it's going to kill you. So it was about the attitude, wasn't it? We have to submit to God's requirements regardless of how we might feel about them. Paul makes this point, doesn't he, in 1 Corinthians 1 verse 21. Since the wisdom of God, the world through his wisdom did not know God, God was pleased to save those who believed through the nonsense, the Greek means absurdity, of our preaching. Jews ask for signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach the Messiah crucified. He's a stumbling block to the Jews and nonsense to the Gentiles, just as it was nonsense to Naaman that he should have to go and wash in this muddy river. But for those who are called, both Jews and Gentiles, the Messiah is God's power and God's wisdom. It's a very powerful statement, isn't it? Doesn't matter what we think. We don't get to dictate the terms. And so he's told to go and be clean. Now his servants approached him and spoke with him, and they said, "My father, had the prophet only asked of you something great, would you not have done it?" So that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because here is this man who thinks he's great and amazing, and he is. He's an achiever. He's excelled in what he does. He's a great man. We're told that, and his expectation was that maybe he had to do something amazing. Maybe he had to climb some mountain which is impossible to climb, or maybe he had to go and fight some battle or some duel, or hold his breath for 16 minutes or something. Maybe that was his expectation. And his servants are saying, look, if he'd given you something really hard to do, wouldn't you have gone and done it? So why won't you just do the easy thing? It's interesting because they say to him, Father. That was their perspective of him. Somebody who nurtures and encourages and supports and provides and protects. He wasn't wasteful of his men like some commanders. He didn't ask them to do things that he wouldn't be prepared to do himself like other commanders. He was experienced and capable, and they trusted him implicitly. And so his servants are very insightful, and his servants are probably his other commanders, his captains and his lieutenants. They could read his mood, and they knew that even when he was most upset, you could still go and talk to him. He wouldn't fly off the handle and bite your head off. And they posit this logical scenario. And so he has to go and bathe 7 times. And you can imagine, brothers and sisters, he goes down the first time and he comes up and he looks at his arms and he goes, nothing yet. Goes in again and comes up, it's like still nothing yet. Goes down 4 times, comes up on the 5th time. And everybody's standing around watching him going up and down in this water, and there's the murmuring. He can hear them. Oh, I don't know what's going on now. Has anything happened? Has anything changed? Has anything changed? Nothing's changed. Okay, okay. How many was that? Was that 5 or was that 6? Was that 4 or was that 3? And he goes down the 7th time, and he comes up, and it says there that his flesh was the flesh of a newborn child, just like that little girl he found and brought into his household. Fresh as a newborn child. 7 times, 7 represents covenant. He had to dip 7 times. It's interesting because the Shunammite's son sneezed 7 times, didn't he? It's a covenant of life. And so Naaman goes back, doesn't he? He went back to the man of God along with his entire retinue and stood before him and said, please, look, that's interesting. He finally meets Elisha. And he says, please, look, I know that there is no other God in all the earth except in Israel. So please take a gift from your servant. So complete change of attitude. Complete change of attitude. No longer me in my fine armor with all my medals and my amazing skills and prowess sitting on my horse looking down at the holy man. Now he's gone into the house on his feet. And he said, I'm your servant, and I know there's no other God but the God that's in Israel. So no longer arrogant or proud, and he doesn't have performance expectations of the prophet. And not only does he know that there's a prophet in Israel, he also knows that the only true God is in Israel. And brothers and sisters, there's no doubt that he would have consulted every healer and holy man in Syria to cure his leprosy. He knew, he had tried everything. He had been to see everybody. No one could help except for this prophet. And so he offers Elisha a gift, and Elisha says no. Well, of course he would say no, because it's not Elisha's place to take a gift, because it wasn't Elisha that cured Naaman. God cured Naaman. Elisha passed on the instructions. Go wash. To accept the gift would cheapen the power of God, wouldn't it? And it would cheapen the power of Naaman's faith. It would cheapen his belief and confidence in God. God's gifts to man can't be purchased with man's wealth. Psalm 49 verse 7, no man can redeem the life of another, nor can he give to God an amount sufficient to pay him. For it would cost too much to redeem his life, and the payments would go on forever, that he should go on living and not see corruption. There's no amount of money we can give. It's a gift from God. It's a blessing from God. Something Simon the sorcerer had to learn, wasn't it? You can't sell on the gifts of God. They're priceless. And to charge a fee would cheapen them. But there is a problem, isn't there? Actually, we'll come to that in a minute. So Naaman said, okay, well, if you don't want to take a present, will you please let your servant load 2 mules with dirt from Israel, because your servant will no longer offer any burnt offering or sacrifice to any other god but Yahweh. Now, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? 2 loads of dirt. Isn't the dirt in Whapara and Abana just as good, if not better? Why would he take 2 donkey loads or 2 cart loads of dirt from Israel? Now, what's he taking? You think about what he's taking. He's taking the land. He's taking the soil. He's taking the inheritance, isn't he? He's saying, I want to take some of the inheritance because I'm never going to worship anybody else. And I need to be connected. I need to be connected to the inheritance of Israel. So can I take some dirt? Leviticus 20 verse 22, be sure to keep all my statutes and obey all my ordinances, so that the land where I'm going to bring you to won't vomit you out. You are to live by the custom. You are not to live by the customs of the nations whom I have cast out from before you, because they did all these things. I detest them. But I promised you that you will inherit the land, and I'm about to give it to you for a possession. Naaman wanted to take that home, because he couldn't move to Israel. There's no way the joint chiefs of staff for the Syrian army can move to Israel. He has to go back. And so he wants to be connected. You see, he'd entered into a covenant with God, hadn't he? And he wanted to take the hope away with him. So he wanted to take the inheritance away with him. And so you imagine he gets back home and his wife comes out and says, why have you got sacks of dirt? What are these sacks of dirt for? He says, oh, they're dirt from Israel. So what are you going to do with those? Oh, I'm going to make a lawn out the back. And every day I'm going to go out and stand on that lawn and I'm going to pray to my God, the God of Israel. Do you think he'll be praying to God by himself? Do you think he would walk out there and pray to God in the morning, or maybe in the afternoon, or maybe both times, and he's standing all by himself? Or do you think a certain maid might be standing beside him? Do you think his wife might be standing beside him? Do you think his close peers who saw his healing in Israel might be standing beside him? See, what we're being told here, brothers and sisters, is that an ecclesia has been formed in Syria. A new ecclesia, in the oddest of places, with the oddest of people. And they worship on Naaman's back lawn. And we know that's likely because he says in the next verse, there's one area which is going to be a problem. I can see the problem. I have to go into my master's temple in Rimmon, and I have to appear to worship there because he leans on my arm and I have to bow down. So please don't take offense. Pardon the offense. I've got a job that requires certain things of me. I'm the king's personal bodyguard. He goes to worship in the temple and I have to go along. But don't think that when I bow my head that I think anything of this temple or this idol. I know there's only a God in Israel. Now, Paul makes a similar concept in 1 Corinthians 8 verse 4. Now, concerning eating food offered to idols, we know that no idol is real in this world, and there is only one God. And I think that's what Naaman's saying. I think that's what Naaman's saying. He's saying, I'm not worshipping this idol just because I put my head down. It's part of the job. It means nothing to me. I worship Yahweh, and I'm taking these sacks of soil to set up my own personal area to worship God, to build my own altar to the God of Israel, to start my own ecclesia. We're running out of time. Now we know the story, don't we? Because Naaman goes away, and Gehazi is very upset about this. He's very upset about the fact that we didn't charge that filthy Syrian anything to save him. You see, Gehazi thinks that the blessings of God are owned by the nation of God. Gehazi thinks that the birthright of Israel should not be shared with anybody, least of all Naaman. And that healing belongs to the Jews. It doesn't belong to that filthy, grubby Syrian. And so I'm going to get something from him because I'm owed. Oh, what a poisonous attitude that is, brothers and sisters. I'm owed something because God did something good for this person. I'm owed something. What a twisted and perverse way to think. You know, brothers and sisters, when we see other people benefit who we don't like or don't think deserve it, or who aren't necessarily nice to us, or have got things that we don't have, is that our attitude? Why does he get to have that? You see it in kids all the time. Mom, he got an ice cream. Why can't I have an ice cream? It's not the way God works. And what's it got to do with you or me? You see, a lot of similarities in this little section in the scripture to Achan, isn't there? Now, Achan wanted what was in Jericho. And God said, fine, you can have what's in Jericho. If you want to steal it, you want to hide it, just like Gehazi does. You want to get it by deception, just like Gehazi does. You can have it. You can have it. You want what Naaman has? You can have it. It's fine. You can have it. Take it. But you get all of it. All of it is what you get. You get what's in Jericho and you get what's coming to Jericho. You get what Naaman's got and you get what he has. There's a warning for us there, isn't there, brothers and sisters? You want the good stuff in the world? Go right ahead. You're getting the bad stuff too. It's not a sweetheart deal. And it's interesting, it's peculiar. This is a different translation, but he says there, Elisha responded, didn't my heart break as the man was turning from his chariot to greet you? So where was Elisha's heart? Well, this translation implies that his heart was with Naaman. He's thinking about Naaman. And he's thinking about what Naaman's going to do with that dirt. And through the power of God, he sees Gehazi calling out. And Elisha's like, oh, please don't tell me this is happening. Please don't tell me this is happening. Didn't my heart break as the man turned from his chariot to greet you? I felt sick. Is now the time to receive money? Is now the time to receive clothes? To buy olive groves and vineyards and sheep and oxen and servants or female attendants? You know, brothers and sisters, Elisha gave all of that up, didn't he? We're told. Elijah comes along, says, I'm going to make you the prophet. You're taking over from me. And Elisha says, give me 5 minutes. I'm going to go and destroy my 24 tractors and give up my big farm and say goodbye to all the servants and leave all the stock that I'm going to inherit from mum and dad. I'm going to give it all away. This is way more important. The work you're giving me is much more important than that. So obviously the answer to the question is no. No, now is not the time to be seeking wealth and power and authority and riches and assets. So what is the time? Because there must be a time for that. At some point, there must be a time when we, and there is a time, isn't there, brothers and sisters, where we get a reward. But when we get the reward, it's ours, and it's ours forever. We get the inheritance forever. We don't get it lent. It's not rented. It's ours forever. But before then, there's work to do. There's the work of Elisha to do. And so he says, Naaman's leprosy will plague you and your descendants forever. And he left Elisha's presence and was infected with leprosy that looked like white snow. Now, it's interesting, brothers and sisters, it's not just Gehazi, is it? So it's you and anybody who comes from you and all of your descendants. And so what he's saying is, Gehazi, you are a representative. Your attitude is, you embody an attitude which if anybody adopts it, they will get leprosy. And what's the attitude? I'm owed. I'm owed something. I want what he has. And I deserve it. Ooh. Covetousness, brothers and sisters. Covetousness and deception. He lies about it. He steals. He lies to the guy he takes it from. He brings it back and he hides it. He co-opts 2 other people and then he lies to the prophet. Ugly, ugly, ugly. The lesson for us, brothers and sisters, is pretty simple, isn't it? If we want what's in the world, we can have it. Just don't complain when Christ throws you out into the world after the judgment seat. You wanted it. You got what you asked for. Welcome to the whole kit and caboodle. You get all of it. What benefit is it to inherit the whole world? What benefit is it to be a billionaire with planes and private jets and staff and houses and super yachts and jet skis and helicopters and respect and adulation and lose your life? Get buried under a pile of stones like Achan. We'll have to flee looking like a snowball of leprosy. Oh, we've gone over time. Super quick, couple of things. We won't go into a lot of detail, but the next section is about Dothan and the chariots of fire. A couple of interesting things out of here. Firstly, in the story, we're told that a servant says to the king of Aram. Now, I think the servant in this section here is likely to be Naaman. And I think the army that goes down to encircle Dothan is an elite force. We're actually told that in this verse. An elite force went down. And I'd suggest that it was actually Naaman who was down here encircling that city. And I'd suggest that that's why they're released. When they go to Samaria, Elisha takes them to Samaria. And I think it's likely that it was Naaman that was there. Because who else would have intimate knowledge of Elisha? And why else would Elisha defend them? But that's another story. The key takeaway from this section, this parable, really is to see with the eyes of God. To understand that the angel of Yahweh surrounds those who fear him and he delivers them. Experience and see that Yahweh is good. How blessed is the person who trusts in him. Psalm 34, verse 7 and 8. So this evening we looked at the miracle of the first fruits, the miracle of the healing, and the miracle of revelation. Prosperity and blessing, salvation and clarity, the ability to see well. And that's the job, isn't it, of the Elisha class. That's the job of the Elisha group. That's our job, brothers and sisters. So the question for you is, and for me, are you an Elisha? Are you dedicated to those things? So we'll leave it there. I'll ask somebody if they can close with prayer, and then if anybody wants to